Welcome back to the Rules of Engagement. We just talked about Rain versus Party Game 3. We're going to jump into game number 4 in just a second, but before or Rain versus Flying, excuse me, I think it's a Party. But before we jump into that, let me encourage you guys to go check out our YouTube channel. If you missed any of our great content, if you missed the match today between Nurchio and Baby Knight, that was a great match. If you missed any Rules of Engagement, whatever you miss, it's all available. YouTube.com/official MLGSC2. It's all available very, very shortly after it airs, within an hour or two. I also want to remind you guys about our subscriber count. Once we get to 5,000 subscribers, we're going to give out the remainder of the beta keys we have over the next day or 2 or 3. And so, you know, the earlier we get that point, the earlier you guys have access to a lot of new beta keys. So please go ahead and subscribe. There's not only the content that you might miss that we air live, but there's also some stuff that's exclusive to our YouTube channel. Highlight videos, comments of the day, Starcraft 2 top 5s and top 10s. These are all great little short videos. You know, you're at work, you need to break, you're on call with your cable company and they're putting you on the robot and the elevator music's playing. Go check out one of these short comments. It was a fun little video to go ahead and check out. But now let us exit this and jump into game number 4 between Rain versus Flying. We're going to talk about the advantages of the Dark Templar opening against a Stargate opening, the advantages of a Stargate opening against a Dark Templar opening, and then how to play to maximize your advantages. About StarCraft 2. A lot of what StarCraft 2 is about, a lot of the skill set beyond the mechanics, right? Of course you have to have good micro, of course you have to have good macro. But what's very important in StarCraft 2, beyond those two things, is you have to understand the advantages that you have in the current situation. So you have the advantage of Dark Templar or the advantage of Stargate. Understand what advantage you have in any given situation, and then understand how to play to maximize that specific advantage. So let's jump into this game and talk a little bit about how to do that in a pro level Heart of the Sworn PvP. So we can see here that Mr. Rain is going for Phoenixes. He's going for the Stargate opening. And Mr. Flying is going, of course, for the Dark Templar opening. Now, the advantage of the Dark Templar opening, from Flying's point of view, the advantage of his opening against Rain's opening is that he has 4 warp gates, right? And his opponent is only going to be on 2. So, even if his opponent has the detection, it looks like Rain, of course, being a great player, is going to figure out, okay, my opponent might be DT rushing me, I should get this robotics if I'm not going to scout, because he's not scouting. Even if he has detection, right? Often the DT player, if they're going for 4 warp gates, which in this case he is, can overpower the Stargate player by superior production capability. The economy looks like it's very similar, right? Rain has like a tiny edge, but it's basically the same amount of economy. But Flying is a player who can actually outproduce his opponent because he has 4 warp gates versus 2, and warp gates are the best way to produce units. So that's the advantage of the Dark Templar player. Even if your opponent defends his force fields and they have an observer on the way, you can often overwhelm them by a superior warp gate count. Now let's talk about the advantages of the Stargate player. Let's pause it right here and talk about the advantages of the Stargate player, right? Let's affect this. Yeah. So the Stargate has a couple advantages. The main advantage the Stargate player has is that he has Stargate units. Now, if he can hold this first rush, then all of a sudden he's got the Phoenixes in play. And Phoenixes are so fast, so mobile, he can do a lot of harassment damage and in turn get an economic advantage, right? If he can hold the first rush, he's going to have this span of time before his opponent can get blink up. And if his opponent can't get blink up, or I mean that time before they get blink or a lot of cannons, basically stabilize their base defense against these very fast, elusive, and powerful Phoenix units, the Stargate player will have map control and harassment potential, right? So if he can survive the first wave and stabilize his defense, he's going to have map control, he can get probe kills, he can be cost efficient. That's his advantage. His advantage will come into play if he can defend. He's got the mobility advantage at that point. So, how to play to maximize your advantages. If you're a DT player, you want to go in there and force a decisive engagement as fast as possible before the units scale up. Because right now, if you keep the unit count low, you can reproduce your army faster, 4 warp gates versus 2. But if the unit count gets high, right, even though you can produce faster, if you look here, right? You've got to be attacking up this area right here, right? If your unit count gets high, you can't force a whole bunch of guys up here, right? You can only get a few. So you want to keep the unit count low to where their concave isn't very, they have this great concave here, right? Oops. All right, well, this thing's not listening to me. You have a very great concave there. If you keep the unit count low, it doesn't matter as much because you can still get your guys in there. If the unit count gets high, all of a sudden, your production, your unit advantage can't be utilized, and their mobility and harassment advantage comes into play. So you got to force a decisive engagement early while the unit count's low. Of course, if you're a Stargate player, you want to defend, and the key thing to defending, as we see here, is this pylon wall-off, right? There's one other key thing to defending. Look at the units the Stargate player has, right? He's got a couple Stalkers, right? Oops. Couple Stalkers, a Zealot, and a Sentry. That's not very good damage output against your opponent's Zealots. Archon is actually, you can basically think of it this way. You can kill an Archon at the same time you kill 2 Zealots. So the Archon you can actually kill fairly quickly. The enemy Stalkers, of course, you can deal with your own Stalkers at a Spear Concave. The problem lies that these Zealots, these guys right here, are going to tank a ton of damage because Stalkers do very little damage to light units. And that while they're tanking damage, your opponent can use that time to break up the ramp. This is where the Phoenix come into play because the Phoenix do outstanding damage to Zealots. And you got to use those Phoenix to pick up these Zealots as fast as possible. Because if you don't pick up those Zealots as fast as possible, what happens here is your opponent can force you up the ramp. You can't really use force fields effectively because the Archon, of course, it plays perfectly. Notice how he's focusing on the Archon with his Stalkers. Now it looks like he's focusing on his Stalker. That's exactly what you do. You want to focus Archon with the Stalkers, but at the same time, the pylon dies because the Zealots kill it so fast. And you got to have those Phoenix to pick up the Zealots because once your opponent gets up the ramp, all of a sudden, they can force an engagement, and they're warping you as 4 at a time, not to mention they have a larger army initially than you do. And from here on, it's all downhill. You're fighting with 4 Stalkers as a giant army, and of course, you're just going to be, you're just going to get overwhelmed as time goes on. Now, ideally, what you do, let's back this up just a hair. I think it should be about right. When you're in this position, ideally what you want to do is, instead of sending your Phoenix out here to harass, right, he's thinking, okay, I can send these Phoenix out here and do some great harass damage, and I'll be ahead. But the key thing to know here is that you can do that. You got about a 5-minute window to do that before you're, well, not 5. You get about a 3-minute window to do that before your opponent can get blink up and a decent amount of units. So the priority is to make sure you don't die. Once you're stabilized, then you go and seize your advantage by using that harassment potential. Until then, the Phoenixes are your anti-Zealot unit. Remember we talked about last game how important the Zealots are. In ground PvP, typically, whoever loses their Zealot line first will lose the game. Or the battle, excuse me. They will lose that engagement. So the Zealot line is critically important. So if you look over into Rain's base, he doesn't have a Zealot line. He's using pylons instead. So in this situation, it's a little bit different. It's, will he lose his pylons, or will Flying lose his Zealots first? And without the Phoenixes, there's no effective way to kill these 4 Zealots. So, of course, his pylons go down before the Zealots dare to even get touched. Now, if you had the 3 Phoenixes there, they would have killed at least 2 of those Zealots by the time the pylon died. And then the other 2 would fall down shortly thereafter, and it could be a very close defense, a very interesting situation. But as it is, he lost his pylons. There's still 4 Zealots out there. The Phoenix are scrambling to get back and defend. And his flying goes on, takes this game to even up the score 2-2. So remember, if you're opening Stargate, your advantage is a little bit later in the game. Make sure to stabilize that defense. Make sure to use Phoenix to kill Zealots. If you're going DTs, try to force that engagement as soon as possible to maximize that warp gate advantage. Take a short break, and then we're going to go on to our next series, which is going to be Sase versus Snute. And we're going to start with game number 2 in that series.